What's up, world? And welcome back to Unseen Work, the live stream and podcast. As always, I'm your host, Myles Biggs. I'm excited to be here with all of you tonight. Before we get into our guest this evening, shameless plug, ticker queued up. Be sure you check out the book, Unseen Work, Why the Best Path to Your Goals is Not Always a Straight Line. You can check that out for sale on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And of course, at milesbiggs.com/unseen work. Grab yourself a copy. And many of you did last week, which is really cool to see. After this intro stream went up last week, I saw several copies flying off the digital shelves. So I appreciate that. Be sure you do that again, especially because our guest tonight is actually chapter 11 from Unseen Work. So if you've already read the book, you've got a little advanced notice on our guest tonight. He is an ethics ninja, a keynote and TEDx speaker, a leadership coach and trainer, a podcast host, a columnist and author. There you go, down on my banner, columnist and author, and a hitchhiking rabbi, because one of those things isn't enough, right? Definitely a lot of unseen work to unpack tonight. So welcome to the stage, everyone, Yonason Goldson.
Thank you, Myles.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here.
It's my pleasure.
So I did a very brief intro, right? But I'd love to hear in your words and in your life and your day-to-day, before we talk about your unseen work, what is it that you would say that you are the most seen for?
That's an interesting question. Well, I was a high school teacher for 23 years.
Okay.
And I retired about 4.5 years ago. And that's when I started my professional speaking business. And the speaking was not too tough. I've been doing a lot of that in front of teenagers. Professional audiences are a little easier in some ways, a little harder in others, but a little different. But really what I wanted to do was distill the 3,000 years of Jewish wisdom that I've been studying and teaching for most of my adult life into a message that was relevant for professionals. And that's really what I'm passionate about. I came up with ethical leadership and intellectual integrity. And the learning to be a businessman was a bit of a challenge later in life, not really part of the original plan. And everything was just starting to move when, of course, COVID happened and the whole
Sure.
Conference industry shut down. So really, I've been just putting out a lot of content, been doing a lot of videos, put out a new book at the end of last year, just started a new podcast with a partner a couple of months ago, the Rabbi and the Shrink. My partner's a psychologist.
That's awesome.
And in this phase of life, even before making a living, I think it's a time when we really need to focus on being of service to others, giving people a message that's relevant, that they can use, that can inspire them, and that can help us connect with one another and create a sense of community even in our isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the isolation, right? Because it's been about a year. I remember this time last year, I think it was March 16th was when my company said, we're going to send you to work from home for about a week till we figure out what this thing is, right? And then here we are. I've just been staring at this room for a year. It used to be just for stuff like this, but now it's every day working at the home office. So that sense of community is huge wherever you can find it. I don't know.
And it has been a silver lining that, imagine if people talk about Zoom fatigue, but imagine if we didn't have it.
Sure.
How really cut off from one another we would be. And it's really possible to create a sense of community. You can seek out people online, people in social media who don't just want to tell you about their cats and what they had for lunch, but actually want to have substantive interchange and interaction. And I found it very gratifying, frankly.
Yeah. It's almost freeing, right? Where you can almost be more of yourself with these people you meet online, right? Because you're not going to bump into them at the coffee shop. They could be all over the world. So you can kind of tear down the walls, take off the mask, and be more of you, I find.
Yeah. And of course, there are people who like to pretend they're somebody else, but it really is an opportunity for us to be our authentic selves in a way that is a little more risk-free.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we get into, I mean, we could probably spend, you could have half a dozen episodes just on you. You know what I'm saying? When you rattle these off, right? If I wanted to talk about the unseen work of what it means to be an ethics ninja, or getting keynotes and being in TEDx, the leadership coach and training, podcasting, writing, your whole hitchhiking story, which is a big part of the book, right? Each of these could be an episode. But so when we talk about the unseen work that got you to where you're at today, when you look back on all of your different experiences, where do you feel like it really started to come together and start to work for you instead of feeling like you're spinning your wheels, not gaining traction?
Well, I don't think that's a straight line. there
Sure.
have
Yeah.
been, we've gone from lots of traction to no traction and back and forth again. But it really is an interesting question when I think back on my life, which has been a series of the unexpected and the unforeseen and the unanticipated. Even graduating from college and having a degree in English and wondering what I'm going to do, and this, in hindsight, somewhat wacky idea came together of going hitchhiking across country, because I wanted to put myself in a situation of the unfamiliar, the unexpected, the unpredictable. I felt as part of my personal growth, I really needed to break out of the sort of comfortable middle-class bubble I'd been growing up in and living my life in. And when you talk about unseen work, when you're standing on the roadside, wondering if anybody's going to stop and pick you up, and if they do, wondering if that's going to be okay, and wondering
Right.
if where you're going to sleep at night, and trying to live on $10 a day. It's there's a lot that's going on beneath the surface that you're not aware of in the moment. It's
Right.
It's one of these. There's so many things we go through in life, and they say the humor is time plus pain.
I like that.
Stories we tell that when we went through them were absolutely miserable, but with perspective, we can find the humor. We can see we've come away with a story to tell. And so the unseen work is unseen even by us very often,
Right.
as we're going through it.
Yeah. And you have to look back, like you said, with perspective to really appreciate it. So when it comes to your unseen work, right, the first type I talk about in the book is generational. I'm curious, especially reflecting, and I know that you're a father, and you could think about this two ways, right? Like your parents and grandparents, but then also now your kids relative to you. For you first, before we talk about your kids potentially, do you feel like everything you've done, have you been like bucking the system and really a black sheep in the family and kind of carving out your own path because you made the choice to like reject your unseen work from the family side? Or now that you've been through it, you can realize, oh, I'm just like my dad in this way, or my grandfather in that way, or mom's, etc.
Yeah, and then that's another complex answer.
Sure.
I grew up in a very secular home and had no Jewish training, no Jewish orientation at all, really. Not even a bar mitzvah as a child. And so I had learned my philosophy. I developed my philosophy of life, reading philosophy, reading literature, studying classics, and trying to put together my vision of what it meant to live a good life, what it meant to be a good person. And when I got to Israel and through a series of unlikely events wandered into a religious seminary and had absolutely no expectation that there was going to be anything there of any relevance to me, and was absolutely stunned when I found this vibrant culture of deep thought and high ideals and morality and community. And it's spending 9 years of my life living in Israel. And that transformed my whole trajectory in life. But really what I did is I discovered the generations and generations and generations that go back over 3,000 years that I had been cut off from, that my parents had been cut off from, that their parents had been cut off from. And it was this sense of reconnecting with the past. So when you talk about unseen work, I mean, there's literally thousands of years of heritage that I stumbled onto with no expectations, and then felt that sense of plugging back in to a legacy and a heritage that I didn't know existed.
Yeah, it's a cool way to think of it. It's like generational meets cultural unseen work, right? Like this, like you said, the 3,000 years, that lineage. Did it feel like the clouds opened and a beam of sunshine came down and you're like, this is it. This is what I was trying to piece together, and it already exists. I don't have to piece it together. Somebody already wrote it down and I just had to find it.
It's kind of interesting that the clouds did open and the light did come down, but then the clouds closed up again.
Okay.
And then I had to do the hard scene work of learning a new language, a new alphabet, learning a whole new way of life. I had to basically uproot I was 24 years old. I thought I had life all figured out. And now you're telling me I'm not even on square one.
Right.
Yeah, there's an agonizing reappraisal there.
Yeah.
It really was a blow to the ego.
It's a good segue right into active unseen work, right? So generational unseen work brought you there. Now you had to relearn a whole alphabet. You had to go through the steps of, okay, if I'm going to become a rabbi, this is what I have to do. There's a point A to point B, and in between was just a lot of doing the work, learning, testing yourself.
Yeah, and it was also for me, everybody has different reasons why they invest in a religious philosophy, why they follow it. For me, I was only interested in one thing. This has to be real. This has to be true. You can tell me it's beautiful. You can talk about community. You can talk about heritage. You can talk about continuity. That's all fine. But yet I have to be convinced this is the real thing. Because up until that point, I was with Karl Marx. Religion is the opiate of the people, and I don't need a drug to get me through life. And I was astonished to discover there really was something there. And then as I committed myself to it, I gradually came to realize that I had a fairly unique ability or opportunity, that because I came from an entirely secular perspective, and now I was immersed in a very religious perspective, I would have I could bridge the gap. I could span that distance, and I could communicate to people why this is rational, why this is the way of life that's worth following, how it's relevant, something that's 3,000 years old. How is it relevant in modern times? How does it fit in with technology? And that's why I went into education, because I wanted to use my unique position as someone who spanned both worlds to inspire young people, to help them find their way in the world.
So you became the rabbi, then you became an educator. Were you educating in the secular area, or was it, in a Jewish school you were a teacher, bridging that gap and bringing that other perspective in?
Yeah, it wasn't a Jewish school.
Okay.
But my approach to teaching Jewish studies was always how to have one foot in each world, because that is the human condition. I mean, human beings, we're a bundle of paradoxes. We're a bundle of contradictions, right? We're spiritual beings living in a physical world. We're individuals trying to fit as part of the community. We're focused on our immediate needs and gratifications while we're trying to plan for the future. It's all tension. And we make a mistake as human beings thinking that we can resolve or eliminate that tension because it's intrinsic to who we are. And the best we can do is manage it and recognize that that is our nature, and that is what it means to be alive. It's dealing with that tension. And if we're not trying to eliminate something that we simply can't escape, then we can learn how to deal with it and how to let it become part of us. So we're not fighting against it, but rather we're working with it.
Yeah, and it can compound and build within us, right? Once it becomes part of you. Which brings me to passive unseen work. You give me good segues here. This is work. I love to hear, because you have this whole list right at the beginning, from ethics ninja to author and coach and trainer, everything we rattled off. You know, I'm sure you look at now, like we talked about with perspective, and you can realize how this came first, then that, and then those two added together to form this third thing, right? What has been, you think, your best example of passive unseen work? Well, at the time you thought you were doing two things that would never really relate to one another or help you get to anything you were doing. And now you realized all those unrelated experiences have brought you to a very specific moment in time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've been talking about it already. You know, when I'm not a big John Lennon fan, but he has one quote that I just think is brilliant. He says, "Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans." And I think that is what you're talking about as passive, unseen work. That, you know, we think that we are focused on we have a direction, we have a plan, and often things don't work out the way we expect them to. Very often they don't work out the way we expect them to. And when we look back and we see that often we've learned more or we've gained more from the apparent failures in our lives than we did from the successes. The things that we thought we wanted and didn't get, some often turn out to be the greatest blessings in our lives.
Right.
The things we really thought we wanted and got, we discover, maybe be careful what you wish for.
Right.
And so, you know, it's hard for me to pinpoint a particular event or a particular outlook, but you know, I traveled around the world 1.5 times. And I was on my second trip around, planning on picking up a bunch of spots that I missed the first time through. And when I got to Israel, my plan was to go and have a classic Israeli experience on a kibbutz, a collective farm. Pick oranges, grapefruits, do that for a few months, and then I was on my way to Kenya and Botswana.
Okay.
And unbelievably, nobody ever remembered this happening before. That there were no spots for volunteers on kibbutzim. The dollar was super strong that year. There were millions of Americans in Europe, and when it got cold in Europe, they all headed south to Israel. And they all wanted to volunteer on a kibbutz because you can work and you don't have to pay to be there. You couldn't get a spot. And so that tremendous disappointment and that sense of confusion. What am I going to do now? I'm burned out on traveling. I need a break. I need a routine. I don't have money to just hang out. And so I ended up in a school that exposed me to ideas I never would have been exposed to before. And you know, we believe there's a guiding hand of fate that steers us where we're meant to be, and then it's up to us to take advantage of those opportunities. So in the sense that we're all passive, in the sense that we have no control over the things that happen to us. But it's how we respond to the things that happen that really determine where we end up in life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And how you respond when no one's watching will determine how you respond when everyone's watching, right?
Well, that's what ethics is all about. And ethics, integrity, it's developing a sense of what's the right thing to do and the discipline to do it.
Yeah. And you mentioned failure earlier, which one of my favorite topics, because I agree with you that you can learn so much from where you fall down. And my two little frameworks here were the flip and the flop on failure. So you talk about flips, it's fail, learn, improvise, pivot. So what's a flip for you? You failed on this wild journey of yours, all these things you've done, and you made it work for you. You learned from it. And then, you know, pivoted and kept going forward. What's a good flip story?
Oh gosh, I guess there are a few of them. when I began my rabbinic training, I wanted to be a congregational rabbi.
Okay.
I later discovered that that was not something I would really have been cut out to do. A lot of complicated community issues that go on and more power to them, the ones who can manage that. But I had a mentor. He was a longtime teacher and principal, and he was one of those people that you're just in awe that somebody can be so good at what they do. You know, I have a friend who in Israel who's a photographer. He would shoot weddings, and whenever he was at a wedding, I was attending a wedding where he was a photographer. I would watch him because you see somebody who's 100% into what they're doing, wanting to do it the best possible way, produce the best possible result. And that's what this teacher was like. He was just a master teacher, and it was so inspiring. This is what I want to do. I want to do what he does. And so that original idea of wanting to be a congregational rabbi eventually fell to the side. And I never really pursued that. And when I was just starting my speaking career, and I had joined the National Speakers Association, I went to my first conference. And the first speaker I heard on the main stage is a fellow who was talking about his message is trust, which is very close to my message of ethics. And he was so sincere and so articulate and so passionate and so authentic. And I literally had tears in my eyes. And I thought, I hope someday I can make people feel like he's making me feel now. And all of this happened because my school had closed the year before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And,
okay.
You know, I'd been teaching for 23 years, and I felt I was getting towards the end. I didn't have the sparkle I once had. The kids were different. I felt it was getting time to move on. But, you know, very often you don't jump until you're pushed.
Yeah, sure.
And, you know, we had a great school. I mean, it was a magnificent school. But there were community politics that were
Always. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, we were fighting to save this school, and eventually we just couldn't save it anymore. And so we failed in that sense. We failed to keep the school alive, but it opened up this door for me. And even though COVID has been a setback again,
Sure.
but I really feel that I'm in my element now. I'm articulating the message that I'm passionate about. I'm getting tremendously positive responses. I've got a book that came out last year, which has been very well received. I have a new podcast, and you know, I believe that the message is getting through. And if it takes a little longer, okay, I can be patient.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. The idea of the pivot during COVID, right? And improvising, like, so you can't do the conferences and speaking, right? So instead you've got the book, you've got the podcast, you're creating all this online content. And I think we're not even going to see it really in 2021, but by 2022, the people who really leaned into creating stuff in the digital space and building a following for podcasts or whatever it might be, those are the people that are going to be booking the speaking gigs. And you're going to have had a year or more of all this practice, market testing different messages, finding out what worked and what didn't work, really refining it so that when you're back up on that stage, you're just going to nail it. And it's going to accelerate everything much quicker than it would have been if you had to market test and doing the in-person thing. So that's my prediction.
Yeah. Well, I'll buy into
here
that.
On March 10th, we can watch it back next
I'll
year.
give you an amen.
Right.
You know, there's a fascinating story
Good.
about a fellow who's a musician, he's a composer, and he was a Jewish fellow, and he became religious. And he was able to find a producer that would get him, just trying to book him concerts. But because he became religious, he couldn't perform on the Jewish Sabbath. So they book him on a Saturday, which is pretty common day for concerts. And he said, "Sorry, I can't do it." So okay, well they tried to work with him and finally said, "Okay, we got you one in the middle of the week." He looked at the calendar and says, "Sorry, that's a Jewish holiday. Can't do it then either." And they said, "We're done. We're finished. Enough." And they dropped him. And it was so upsetting to him because he felt that he could really have something here, and he felt that it was his commitment to his religious values that was stopping him from being successful. And shortly thereafter, he got an email or phone call from Microsoft. And they had heard one of his pieces online, and they wanted to use it.
Oh, wow.
I don't know which one it was, but whether the computer music or the ad music, all of a sudden he finds himself having this incredibly lucrative contract when it looked like things were hopeless. You never know. You never know when success is right around the corner.
Yeah, you never will find out if you stop, right? You'll never reach it to that point. So you just got to keep on going.
Exactly.
Got a comment here I'm going to bring in. This is a good reminder for me. I forgot to mention this in the front. Everybody watching, if you've got a comment, if you got a question for me, for Yonason, please type it wherever you're listening. We're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook. Let us know you're out there. Let us know what you have to say, and we can pull it into the conversation. So this is Jennifer Cooper commenting on what you said about you don't jump until you're pushed, saying she sometimes wonders where the push comes from, but agree that the push in the pull helps you find your passion. So for you, your example, I think, of the push was, hey, the school closed, so you had to do something, right?
Yeah.
But if we follow this comment from Jen a little bit, what do you think are some other examples of a push, like where you're kind of forced into that pivot or improvisation?
Well, this really struck home for me when I was learning the Napoleon Hill, and I think it's in Think and Grow Rich, that he gives an example that when Cortez landed in the New World, and he and his men got off their ships, and they were looking around, and suddenly they found themselves confronted by hostile natives and outnumbered 100 to 1. So what was Cortez's first command?
Burn the boats.
Burn the ships.
Yeah, I love that story.
Now, of course, Cortez is not one of our great heroes in history, but the lesson is that if you think you have an easy way out, if you think you've got a plan B, if you think you got a safety net, so there's always going to be part of you that feels, well, I don't really have to make it. I don't really have to get it right, because there'll be another chance, there'll be another way. And then you're holding back. And if you're holding back, you're not putting in 100%. You may not accomplish what you would have accomplished if you would have had that sense of desperation. Sometimes the push comes from the outside, and sometimes we just have to find a way of pushing ourselves.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Sometimes you have to be your own push, right? And make it happen. Burn, people are waiting to be told to burn the boats, right? But sometimes it's making that hard choice to burn them yourself without that outside influence to really propel you forward.
Yeah.
What about a flop, Yonason? We talked about the flip and when you improvised and pivoted. Was there ever a time where, to me, whenever I say this, it's like the flip, you're doing a backflip, you're excited, you did it. A flop is you're just face down. Like I lost. You failed, you lied, you obsessed, you pretend, you just kind of pushed it under the rug. Do you have an example of this in your life, your career, where you really feel like the opposite was true for you? You weren't able to turn it into something positive? And then if so, what was the learning, the lesson that came out of that?
I certainly have felt that. I don't know if it was in response to a specific incident.
Okay.
I think it's more, for me, it's sort of the natural peaks and valleys that we all go through. That I can be in this mode where I just feel like I've got the wind in my sails and everything is moving forward. And then, almost instantaneously, it can feel like, gosh, I'm spinning my wheels. I'm not getting anywhere. And sometimes it's right after a success. In other words, I published my first book, or I got on my first podcast, or I gave my first speech. And then nothing's changed.
Right. Now what? Right?
The sky did not open up and the angels did not come down. And okay, I thought this was a sign that I was really on my way, and now I was just going to have to keep flying. When I started my speaking business, I started with cold emails.
Okay.
And I was going through lists of professional associations, and I booked my first keynote speech with 30 emails.
It's pretty good.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's a good ratio right there.
It's incredible. And I thought, okay, this isn't going to be that hard.
300 emails later, right?
Yeah. On the one hand, I really needed that success to show me it could be done.
Sure.
But on the other hand, it set up a whole bunch of false expectations, unreasonable expectations that it was going to be that easy. And from that one, I got a referral. So that was good. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
And then a friend of mine referred me to another one. And so in a very short period of time, I had 3 keynotes. And then there was a long dry spell. And it just, I couldn't figure out, what am I supposed to do? Why was it working before? Why isn't it working now? It's very easy for us to get down on ourselves in that type of situation.
Absolutely.
Maybe this just isn't going to go.
Especially when the outside looking in, people are like, wow, you're killing it. You had all these keynote speeches. You're doing great. And you're sitting there going, what is happening? I'm not doing great. I should be here and I'm not. And, it's that dry spell. So how'd you weather that? What did you do? What unseen work did you put in to come out on the other side of it?
It was just perseverance. Fortunately, I have a very supportive wife who has a steady job, and she was willing to let me keep persevering. I tried. You take some courses. You talk to people in the business. You sign on to webinars, and there's a lot of information out there, but taking that information and applying it practically is generally a whole different mindset. It's just determination. It's just perseverance. You have to believe in yourself. You also have to have good reason to believe in yourself.
Sure.
In other words, I had enough colleagues telling me that they thought that I have really good material, and I have a great message, and I have a great style. And, if they would have been lying to me, that would not have been ethical. It wouldn't have been what friends and colleagues are for. Sometimes we have to tell our friends and colleagues bad news.
Right.
If I want to be a singer, I want to be an actor, and I've got no talent, I don't need people to encourage me.
Right. You need the
honest truth. If I develop talent, that's a different story. But if I'm just not cut out for this business, then I need people who are going to tell me that so I can get onto a different track. But when I had people who were reassuring me, you're doing everything right, and the reason people fail in this business is because they give up too quickly.
Sure. I think that's true for so many things, right?
Absolutely.
We often look for that golden nugget. What's the one-liner, Yonason, the secret key that's going to unlock it, right? And it's often the unsexy answer of don't stop, right? I say it to people when they talk to me about podcasting, right? Or It's like, you probably get this question too, right? How many podcasts should I release when I start a show? And my answer is always whatever number a week you can commit to from now until the end of time. That's how many you should do, because you have to make that commitment and show up weekly or bi-weekly or whatever it is you're going to tell people, and you can't stop, because it's just one of those things where it's just the perseverance. It'll build and build. And the moment you stop it's over. You lose the momentum and it's done.
Yeah. I mean, how do you lose weight? Diet and exercise.
Yeah.
What's the most popular, one of the most popular books sold are diet books, right? And how many people have tried any number of different diets? And you know what? They all work if you keep to them.
Right. It's got to become the lifestyle eventually.
And they all don't work if you don't keep to them.
Especially don't work if you buy the book and don't read it, right? Like we know a lot of people.
Exactly. You know, it's yes, there are people who just stumble on success and they have charmed lives and everything falls into their laps. Okay, very nice. Maybe.
Yeah.
They're probably dark side. I mean, everybody's talking about this, this interview that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle gave with Oprah. On the one hand, it's kind of hard to feel sorry for people living in a 9-room mansion. On the other hand, you can really understand how, the complete lack of privacy, the sense of powerlessness. I'm sure they told her what she was going to have to live with as a, I don't know, princess, duchess, whatever she is. Right? But the reality of it, I'm sure, is something that she really couldn't have anticipated.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Hearing about it, then living it, two different things.
Yeah. So, everybody's got problems. And, they talk about the problems with social media, with Facebook. Everybody's putting their best face on. Right. Making it look like, look at me, I'm always smiling. My friends are always smiling. I'm in exotic places, and everybody's living a life like that except me. Except I'm putting the same thing on Facebook.
Right.
And it's not real for me. It's not real for them either.
Right. Yeah. So much of it's about what you don't see, right? The unseen.
There you go.
The offline stuff. So we're touching on something. This is funny. Again, I'm saying you're giving me all the segues earlier. I swear everyone watching or listening, we didn't go over these before, but something I put in here to talk about with you, and I want to talk with everybody, is what I'm calling point C. And you talked about this a little bit when you said you published your first book. Great. You landed your first speaking gig. Great. Point C for me is that now what moment, right? So you wanted to go from point A to point B. You start out at point A saying, I'm going to write a book. And you put in the work. It's years for many people of writing and editing and reworking and everything that goes into it. You know it very well, and I just did it too. Then you hit point B, you publish the book, you're all excited. And then it's, in many ways, it's sort of a anticlimactic experience. At least it was for me, right? It's all this build up, you do the launch, everybody's excited, and then you have to like turn off the cameras and you're done talking about it, and you sit with yourself and you're like, well, what do I do now? So you go from point A to point B. Now you got to go from point A to point B to point C. And how do you do that? Like, so I'm curious for you, yes, perseverance, but of all the things you've done, you've scaled those metaphorical mountains to then come down the other side and pick a new peak to traverse with all the things you've done. How have you navigated those point B to point C moments in your life? What's your advice to folks that, are going through this right now?
I think it's kind of
me included
already.
Tell me, what do I do, Yonason?
Yeah, it's, I like to say, go to work for Nike.
Yeah, just do it.
Just do it. I mean, it's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If there would be a secret formula, we'd all know about it because somebody would have marketed and made a fortune doing it. Every time you see one of these ads, you'll become rich and famous in 30 days.
Yeah.
Not very likely.
No, but it sounds so appealing.
Sure, we all want that. We all want the silver bullet. We all want the magic pill. It's just not the way life works. But the if there is a trick, it's not really a trick. It's just a mindset. It's simultaneously having long-term and short-term goals. We need short-term goals to give us that sense of accomplishment, but we need long-term goals because that's how you fight that sense of letdown.
Sure.
You know, if you're reading a really good book, you want to get to the end. You want to find out how it's all wrapped up. And the moment you read the last page, what do you feel? Disappointment.
Yeah, like something's missing. You know,
I mean, I'm so invested in the story and the characters, and it's over. What are you going to do?
Yeah, so that's where you need to have that stack of other books ready to go, where now you can pick up the next one. To your point, I like that. I never thought of it that way about if you get, like for me, I use me as an example, right? Recently, I gave my TED Talk and published my book. Those were two very long-term goals. And I was working at simultaneously, and they were so all-consuming for me, rehearsing and memorizing the talk, writing and editing the book, all of it. Like I didn't have much space for anything else. So I sort of edged out short-term goals in favor of these two long-term things. I reached both, and now I didn't have anything sort of ready to pull up, right? And so there's this weird gap and moment where it felt weird because all this time I'd been putting into all these two things I had back, but I didn't know what to do with it. And it felt, like you said, like a disappointment, a little bit empty. Like, where do I go from here? And that I was so sure about those two things. Now I'm unsure about my point C. It's just a weird thing to experience.
Yeah, I did hear a strategy once that I think is very wise. I do it intermittently. I don't keep it up as much as I should, but I think it's a really well thought out formula. Is you take a piece of paper, 8 by 11 piece of paper, and you quarter it. Right? And in one corner, you have your 3-year or 5-year goals. In one corner, you have your 1-year goal or goals, maybe 2-3 main goals. In the third quadrant, you have your 90-day goals. And in the fourth quadrant, you have a sticky note with your weekly goals. And you change that one every week.
Sure.
And you rewrite the whole page every 90 days. And I think it really speaks to what we're talking about, because it keeps us with that sense of having long-range vision while staying focused on what we need to do right now. And therefore, every victory, every completion is just a step towards those other steps along the way.
Right. Yeah, if you saved all those sticky notes and the whole rewrites and look back at it, you would notice that progression in hindsight, right? That makes sense. Yeah, because I definitely didn't do that. It was like tunnel vision. But that makes sense to plan it out. It's almost like it's long and short, but also medium too. You know, it's and that's helpful. I think you got to have those check marks, the milestones that you can check off. Is what I should have said. That's helpful. So another comment from Facebook this time, instead of LinkedIn. Jen Haywood here is saying it's tempting to just sit and wait when nothing is happening in point C, but those are the times where we have to keep moving. Only action gets us to the next point. So there you go. She's picking up what you're putting down, Yonason. You got to keep persevering and keep going. Thanks for that comment, Jen.
Yeah, I mean, we would all like someone to show up and solve all our problems for us and open the doors for us. And every once in a while that happens. But it's not
that push we were talking about, right? You know, someone could push you in that direction or help you along. Yeah. So you rattled off a few things at the beginning of things you're working on. So as we move to wrap up this conversation, I want to point people to the Yonason Goldson ecosystem so they can get more of what you have to offer, because there's a lot of it. So I know you've got your website, right? YonasonGoldson.com. But what was the name of the podcast that you said?
Podcast is The Rabbi and the Shrink.
That's so funny. I love that name. What do you guys talk about on that? What can people expect from The Rabbi and the Shrink?
Well, we're the subtitle is Everyday Ethics Unscripted. We're trying to sort of highlight the attitudes and strategies for living more ethical lives, because ethics is at the heart of all our relationships. You only want to have relationships with people that you trust, and you're not going to trust people who aren't ethical.
Yeah.
So we actually just started. We just had our second guest on. We did several episodes, just the two of us, and now we're starting to have guests at different angles on ethics, whether it's business, relationships. We wanted customer service next week. Just different ways that we can train ourselves to think more ethically about interactions with people in our day-to-day lives.
That's awesome. So everyone, here it is on the screen. Go check out that podcast, The Rabbi and the Shrink. Head on over to YonasonGoldson.com. I know the books are linked over there and a lot of other content you have. So make sure we send people over there to support you. And again, everyone, he's chapter 11 in Unseen Work, the ethics ninja, keynote and TED speaker, leadership coach and trainer, podcast host, columnist and author, hitchhiking rabbi. Take a breath. Yonason Goldson. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your unseen work with me and everyone watching or listening. I got a lot of this conversation. I always enjoy talking with you. So I hope you enjoyed yourself as well.
It's a pleasure, Myles. And certainly I invite the audience to look me up on LinkedIn, where I'm very active. To go to my website, I've got some freebies there they can ask for. And I'm always happy to take the conversation offline. So please reach out, and happy to talk.
Awesome. And everyone watching, be sure, got the ticker up next week. Same day and time, Wednesday at 8:45 p.m. Eastern. We've got Aaron Sirach joining us. Aaron was, I believe, chapter 13 of the book Unseen Work. So we're going to unpack her story as well. So join us here, same time, same day, same time next week for another edition of the show. And I hope everyone watching has an awesome week. We will see you next time.